The Thomas Code, Chapter 3. 5 Trees in Paradise. 1.18 Jesus said, "Blessed is he who was before he came into being. If you should be my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. For you have 5 trees in paradise which do not move summer and winter, and their leaves do not fall. He who knows them will not taste of death." Thomas 19. It was in the above saying that I first found a trace of the Thomas Code. It had always been one of the most mysterious sayings in the whole Gospel. The meaning of the 5 trees has confounded all commentators. There were 2 trees in the Garden of Eden, but 5. Even those who are most confident in giving their own interpretation of each saying have pulled up at the 5 trees. For a while, I favored the possibility that the 5 trees meant the 5 senses, but eventually rejected this idea because there was nothing in the saying to support it. There was, however, one clue to the meaning of the 5 trees. Many years ago, I had come across a posting to a Gospel of Thomas group that suggested that the 5 trees must mean the Gospel of Thomas. The reason for thinking this was that the language of Thomas 19 matched the incipit in which it is promised that one who knew the meaning of the words the gospel would not taste death. In Thomas 19, one who knows the trees will not taste death. So logically, both the words and the trees should mean the same thing. If this were the case, then the leaves that do not fall would be a reference to the individual sayings, but there was much that did not fit this explanation. Why should the trees not move during both summer and winter? Would there even be summer or winter in paradise? And then there was the odd image of the stones that minister. What did this mean? There was something else, though, that supported the idea that the 5 trees were gospel. There were clear clues that the gospel was coming to an ending at this exact point. This was puzzling because the gospel would then have just 18 sayings. This assumes that we regard Thomas 1 as being part of the incipit, as most scholars do. But it did, of course, continue for another 95 sayings. Some people thought that perhaps this first part of Thomas was originally a separate work, a mini-gospel that was then expanded by the addition of many more sayings. If so, then the 5 trees would have been the very last thing in this original gospel. So it was fitting that they applied to the whole. Nor was it unreasonable that the gospel should be compared to trees in paradise. There were clues linking the saying to the story of the creation in Genesis. It is well known that in Eden there were 2 trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve were permitted to eat of any tree except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But Eve was seduced by the promise of the serpent that if she ate she would not die but would have knowledge like God. She goes ahead and eats of the tree and persuades Adam to also eat. But when Yahweh finds out, he exiles them from paradise. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat, and live forever." Genesis 3:22, Ezev. It is fascinating that Yahweh seems to agree with what the serpent has told Eve. By tasting of the fruit of good and evil, they have become as one of us, that is like the Elohim, the gods, but they have yet to eat from a second tree, the tree of life. If they ate from this tree, they would live forever. This ties into Thomas 19, where one who knows the trees will not taste death. The Gnostics attached huge importance to this story in Genesis, and some of them equated the apple to gnosis. In this view, Yahweh was the lower God, the demiurge, who was deliberately keeping knowledge from mankind. So we might see the 5 trees as a Gnostic element that has crept into Thomas. Except for the frustrating detail that we have 5 trees and not 1 or 2. After grappling with the saying over the years, I concluded that it was essentially unsolvable because we were missing a vital piece of the puzzle. I thought there must be a work featuring the 5 trees, but that it had been lost. Now, however, the 5 trees were staring me in the face. 3, 2, 3. True, 3. They were the 5 factors of the Thomas Code, and I saw something else. That odd phrase that the 5 trees do not move summer and winter suddenly made sense. Suppose we go through the sequence a pair at a time. We start with 3 and 2, then we have 2 and 3, and so on. This gives a series of pairs that we can think of as 2 seasons. 3, 2, summer. 2, 3, winter. 3, 2, summer. 2, 3, winter. Yet regardless of whether it is summer or winter, we still get the same total. 3 plus 2 equals 2 plus 3 equals 5, which equals the number of factors. The 5 trees do not move summer or winter because each pair sums to 5. Of all the ways in which we could order the 5 factors, this is only true for the Thomas Code ordering. So, if we started with the concept of the prime factorization of 108 and combined this with the information in Thomas 19, that the trees do not move summer or winter, then the Thomas Code would be determined uniquely. There is no other way we can structure the factors. It was the 5 trees saying that first led me to the importance of 5 in the Thomas Code and the fact that if we sum any successive factors, we get the total number of factors. Whoever composed Thomas 19 understood this property and wanted to draw our attention to it. This was not the only thing that the Thomas Code explained. The very positioning of the saying was a powerful confirmation. The gospel was not coming to an end, nor were the first 18 sayings originally a separate gospel. The Thomas Code predicted that the gospel should be organized by 18s. As the Jesus movement attached particular importance to the principle of first and last, the first and the last 18s were particularly important. The gospel was marking the end of this first 18 by linking back symmetrically to the beginning. The 5 trees saying was positioned as the very last of the 18 and was symmetrical to the first saying about seeking and finding. If the 5 trees meant the Thomas Code, and hence the gospel, then this was exactly where it should be. It was the culmination of the theme of seeking and finding that ruled the first group of 18. It was clear that their leaves do not fall must represent the sayings, which are eternal. But what did the stones that minister mean? We will come to this shortly and show how it is explained by the Thomas Code. But first, we will take a more detailed look at the placing of the saying in the first 18. The first 18. The diagram shows the structure of the first 18. The Gospel starts with a brief introduction, which scholars call the incipit. These are the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said this, "Whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death." Thomas incipit and Thomas 1. Coptic, the second half, and he said this, is conventionally numbered as the first saying, Thomas 1. However, I follow Stephen Davies and others in taking Thomas 1 and the incipit as one whole. Finding the meaning of the words and not tasting death links back to the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke in the first part of the incipit. The first proper saying, then, is conventionally numbered as Thomas 2. 1.1 Jesus said, "Let him who seeks not stop seeking until he finds, and when he finds he will be troubled, and if he is troubled he will become amazed, and he will become king over the all of it." Thomas 2. This is one of the most significant sayings in the Gospel. It is one of 3 keystone sayings, each relating to searching and finding and each located in one of the 336s where it occupies a specific position. As the first saying of the whole Gospel, this keystone saying does double duty. It rules both the first 36 and also the Gospel as a whole. Saying 1.18 is symmetrical to 1.1 within the 18. One is last and the other first. We will see that 1.18 is also closely linked to the incipit. There is also a link between the second saying 1.2 and the second from last 1.17. Not only does this indicate the symmetrical nature of the 18, but 1.17 also gives us a clear clue that the 18 is coming to an end. The end and the beginning. 1.17, the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end shall be." Jesus said, "Have you discovered then the beginning, that you seek after the end? For where the beginning is, the end will be also. Blessed is he who will stand in the beginning, and he will know the end and not taste of death." Thomas 18. In this saying, the very idea of linear time is challenged. The disciples expect the apocalypse and kingdom of heaven to come at the end of time, but Jesus points them back to the beginning, the first spiritual creation in Genesis. To those in the kingdom of heaven, all time is one. If they exist at the beginning, they will exist also at the end. Although this is the first and most substantive level of meaning, it is normal for Thomas' sayings to do double or triple duty. The deeper spiritual meaning exists simultaneously with a lighter riddle meaning. So we will see how this saying cleverly alludes to the structure of Thomas, as well as expressing the philosophy of the Jesus movement towards time. Links between 1.17 and 1.2. Sayings 1.2 and 1.17 are symmetrical within the 18. 1.2, Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'Behold, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will become first before you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will become first before you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you should know yourselves, then you shall be known, and you shall realize that you are the sons of the living Father. But if, however, you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty, and you are poverty." Amos 3. The two sayings are linked, with one concerned with the location of the kingdom in physical space, and the other with its location in time. In 1.2, those who lead you say that the kingdom of heaven is in the sky or under the sea. However, the idea that the kingdom is located in a particular place is rejected. It is inside you and outside you. In 1.17, the disciples think that the kingdom is at the end, but Jesus tells them that the kingdom is not at a particular time. Where the beginning is, the end will be also. In both sayings, the end result of knowing is the kingdom of heaven. In 1.2, those who know themselves will be sons of the living Father, whereas in 1.17, one who knows the end will not taste death. The symmetry between 1.17 and 1.2 is important because it shows that the next saying must be the end of the section, the 18. But this is also indicated by other clues. The end is nigh. Most obviously, 1.17 contains a strong clue to the approaching end. "Tell us how our end shall be." This is very typical of the riddling nature of Thomas. The question is telling us that the end is imminent and will come with the next saying. Symmetry. Jesus' reply expresses the symmetry and chiastic structure of the 18, and indeed of the gospel as a whole, by linking the end to the beginning. Have you discovered then the beginning, that you seek after the end? For where the beginning is, the end will be also. The link of beginning and end applies at different levels. 1. To the 18. 2. To the gospel as a whole. Some of the symmetries of the 18 are illustrated by the diagram, and we will see additional expressions of this symmetry when we analyze the first 18 in more detail. But there is also symmetry within the whole gospel, between the first and last 18s. Most obviously, the second saying 1.2 is closely linked with our second-to-last saying 6.17 as two bookends. We will see that 1.17 comes into this structure and is also linked with 6.17 as well as 1.2. The symmetry of the gospel is a reflection of the symmetry of time itself, and the same symmetry is found in the Thomas Code. 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. This also can be read either backward or forward with the same result, so that where the beginning is, the end is also. Will not taste death. Let us walk through 1.18 in its entirety. It starts with a blessing. Blessed is he who was before he came into being. This is connected with the last line of 1.17. Blessed is he who will stand in the beginning, and he will know the end and not taste of death. In 1.17, one who stands at the beginning is blessed, whereas in 1.18, it is the one who existed before he came into existence who is blessed. What does this strange idea of existing before you came into being mean? In fact, both blessings relate to the creation story in Genesis. A person can exist before he came into being because in Genesis there are two accounts of the creation of man, Adam. In the first creation, Adam was made hermaphrodite, male and female. In the second creation, he was made again out of dust, and the female, Eve, separated from his rib. The Jesus movement believed that the first creation was a spiritual creation which took place before the second physical creation. This first creation resulted in a spiritual reality that was more fundamental than the degraded physical reality around us. By entering the kingdom of heaven, a Christian would return to this first spiritual reality. They could only do this if they had an existence which transcended physical reality by existing in the first creation. Before their physical birth, time was an aspect of the physical universe and did not exist in the spiritual creation. So one who entered into the kingdom of heaven and the first spiritual reality transcended time. The saying continues, "If you should be my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you." This links back to the incipit. These are the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said this, "Whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death." The incipit says that Jesus spoke the hidden words, and that one who finds the meaning of the words will not taste death now in the last saying of the 18. It is promised that if you should be a disciple and listen to Jesus' words, these stones will minister to you. We will see what this odd expression of the stones means in the next section, but we will first look at the remainder of the saying, "For you have 5 trees in paradise which do not move summer and winter, and their leaves do not fall. He who knows them will not taste of death." So one who listens to the words and knows the trees will not taste of death, the same expression we find in the incipit. We have seen how the 5 trees stand for the Thomas Code, and hence the Gospel of Thomas. So the words and the trees are the same thing, the Gospel of Thomas which brings life. We can now see how the last line of the previous saying, 1.17, cleverly alludes to 1.18. It starts with "Blessed is he who will stand in the beginning," which, as we have seen, links to the beginning of 1.18, and he will know the end. Linking to the end the last saying of the 1.18, and specifically the 5 trees, and not taste of death. The identical expression that ends 1.18 and links back to the incipit, the stones that minister. There is one element of 1.18 left to explain. "If you should be my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you." To minister is to supply with food and drink. So what can be meant by saying that stones will minister? And how can this tie in with the idea that the 5 trees are an allusion to the Thomas Code? There is one story in Matthew and Luke that does talk about stones becoming bread, and that is when Jesus goes into the wilderness and is tempted by the devil. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, speak that these stones might become loaves of bread." But answering he said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Matthew 4:3-4. This is expressing a close parallel to the Thomas saying. Not only do we have the stones turning into bread, but also the concept of the word from the mouth of God. In 1.18 in the incipit, the words that bring life come from the mouth of Jesus. So, has Thomas taken the idea of stones that minister from Matthew or Luke? No, because the Matthew story is literal and the Thomas saying is metaphorical. Whatever the saying means in Thomas, it is certainly not that stones will magically begin dispensing food or turn into tasty loaves of bread. The metaphor comes first, and it is then misunderstood and literalized as a miracle story. Matthew and Luke have taken the metaphor from Thomas and not the other way around. To understand the real origins of the stones that minister, we must look at the two elements separately. First, who is it that ministers? And second, what was the meaning of the stones to the Jesus movement? We will see that the two questions point to the same answer. Those who minister. The word to minister is the Greek diakone. Although the general meaning was to supply the wants of someone, such as to give them food and drink, to the Jesus movement it meant something very specific. It applied to the role of ministering in the spiritual sense to those in the movement. It has given us the word deacon as well as the English minister for those who look after a flock. To the Jesus movement, it was spiritual food and drink that was ministered, the bread and wine of the Eucharist, the substance of Jesus. It is the food that can be infinitely divided and shared. Although given by all ministers, the power and authority derived from the original disciples apostles, whom Paul calls simply the 12. In Acts, we find the 12 in a story about ministering. Now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily ministration, diaconia. And the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to minister diaconin at tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, who we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry." Diaconia of the word. Acts 6, 1, 4. We have here a tradition that both the 12 and the 7 were involved in ministering to the movement. We should not get too distracted by the literal elements of this story. The person who wrote both Luke and Acts is a very able novelist who invents shamelessly. But behind the literal elements we can see the original source. The 12 were first involved in ministering to the disciples. The 12 were supplanted in this task by a new group called the 7. In Acts, the 7 are ministering to the Hellenists. That is the Gentiles. This suggests that the appointment of the 7 was connected with the expansion of the movement away from Judea and across the Roman Empire. In the Acts story, the food and drink become literal. But this was not the real meaning of ministering to the movement. It was spiritual food and drink that was the true sustenance. Neither should we give any credibility to the names of the 7 in Acts, which are a complete invention by the author of Acts. Most likely the real 7 were the same group that Paul calls the brethren of the Lord, with James as their leader. The evidence of Paul's letters shows that the brethren were in charge of the movement when Paul was writing his epistles in the AD 50s, and that they were not the same group as the 12. We have answered the question of who ministers to the disciples. It was the 12, followed by the 7. But what is the connection to the stones? The 12 stone. The reason why the 12 should be called stones is found in the Torah, in the stories about Moses and his successor Joshua. Moses led the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, parting the waters of the Red Sea so that they could pass over safety and escape the pursuit of Pharaoh's army, who were drowned when the waters closed again. Although Moses was to lead the Israelites to within sight of the Promised Land, he was forbidden to cross over by Yahweh and died at Moab. It was Joshua who crossed the Jordan, in a miracle that is very similar to, but less spectacular than, the crossing of the Red Sea. Joshua commanded the priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant to the edge of the waters, which then parted in front of them. They were then able to walk on the dry river to the center of the river, even though the waters were swollen by the rains. As the priests hold the ark, the people walk across the river. Joshua then orders 12 men, one for each of the 12 tribes, to take a stone from the riverbed where the priests stand and erect it on the bank. The 12 stones are a memorial to the 12 sons of Israel. Joshua 3, 1, 4, 9. We find a similar story about 12 stones applying to Moses. Before ascending Mount Sinai and receiving the law from Yahweh, he erects 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel, who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Exodus 24, 4-5. The young men are a group of 12 young men that follow Moses around to represent the 12 tribes. The link to Jesus and the 12 has been noted by scholars who believe that Moses' 12 are the prototype for the Christian 12. So we find stories about both Moses and Joshua in which 12 stones represent the 12 sons of Israel, and that the same stories are behind the appointment of 12 special disciples in the Jesus movement. It is clear that the stones that minister must represent the 12. But how is this connected to the Thomas Code? The stones that minister in the Thomas Code. We can, in fact, find both the 12 and the 7 from the Thomas Code. Let us look at the sequence again, this time emphasizing the central 3. 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. Like the whole sequence, this 3 is also symmetrical. It is positioned at the heart of the Thomas Code, so we should not be surprised if it is significant. Suppose we multiply it out. What do we get? 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2 equals 12. It gets us to the 12. The stones that minister, meaning the 12, are encoded at the very center of the Thomas Code. We have seen that adding factors was also important. This was how we got 5 from 2 successive factors. So suppose we add the 3 central factors instead of multiplying them. 2 plus 3 plus 2 equals 7. This gives us the other group who minister, the 7. The original stones that minister must be the 12, as only the 12 are related to the stones in Scripture. There are 2 possibilities. Either the person who put the Thomas Code together has noted the coincidence that the central triplet multiplies to 12 and put an allusion to this in 1.18, or the whole idea of the 12 has come in the first place from the Thomas Code. If so, then this central 12 has been connected to the stories about Moses and Joshua, from which the idea of the 12 disciples and apostles has come. As the 12 are a very early feature, this second possibility would require the Thomas Code to have been in existence from the very beginning of the movement, which seems unlikely. We can be more confident that the concept of the 7 has been generated from the Thomas Code. The 7 come on the scene much later than the 12. They are only connected to the stones indirectly, through the Thomas Code. So it seems that when a replacement to the 12 was desired, the central 3 factors were added to justify 7. As the original 12 were intimately connected to the 12 tribes of Israel, it makes sense for the 7 to be associated with the new mission to the Gentiles. The importance 18. The significance of the central triplet in the Thomas Code leads to another insight. There are actually 3 such triplets in the sequence. The other 2 are positioned at the beginning and end, as shown here. These both give the triplet 3, 2, 3. This is also symmetrical and multiplies out to 18. 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 3 equals 18. We will see how vital the 18s are in the organization of the gospel. The fact that the triplet at the beginning and end of the sequence gives 18 provides a reason why the compilers of Thomas should attach particular importance to the 18s. The following diagram shows the first 18. Symmetries and links between beginning and end.